Hey, hi, how you doing? This is the Gamertron, and welcome back to the Gamertron Show. So, I know it's been a while, couple weeks, but people are still very, what's the word, in debate over the new Star Wars Battlefront. Apparently that trailer and those new details released, turns out that that whole debacle hasn't died down much. So I am joined once again by the good Grindhead Jim.
Thank you. Yeah, Star Wars is a thing. Apparently, I didn't know.
I know, right? I mean, how many years has it been since the last movie? You thought that was dead.
Yeah, right. I mean, I was born the day before the first movie came out, so I don't know why Star Wars still exists. I mean, clearly the focus should be on me. I'm older.
Exactly. Exactly. But yeah, guys, we freaking love Star Wars.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so both Jim and I played the original Star Wars Battlefront and Battlefront 2.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Battlefront and Battlefront 2 were my childhood. Basically, I already told this story, but Battlefront is a big part. It was the first video games I played before I really got into video games. And so this is important to me, and this new Battlefront being developed by DICE and published by EA, it's a big deal to me. I'm probably going to pick this up. Whether it's good or not, I'm probably going to pick it up because it's Battlefront, and I need to see how people of today, how the developers of today are going to create a game made back then a decade ago. It's hard to believe that Battlefront 2 released over a decade ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
anyways, people already know my story with Battlefront. Childhood game I got for Christmas, game I played before I got into video games. What's your story with the Battlefront games?
I would argue, and granted, for those of you who don't understand, if you hadn't figured out by now, I'm a fair slight older than Gamertron. I actually had the beginning of my second marriage, more or less, between Halo and Battlefront. Those were the two defining things. Because the first Battlefront had come out October or November, I want to say, of 2004, at least for console. And it was a simultaneous release. And I got it. We had just gotten an Xbox a few months prior as a wedding gift. I'm not even kidding. And I played the first Battlefront a lot, and the second one even more. And I'm a huge Star Wars fan, always have been, always will be. The prequels, we don't talk about the prequels, but
well, except Revenge of the Sith, that one was pretty decent.
Yeah, it was definitely a good film. But I would argue that it was a turd that they were attempting to polish, and the thing is, if you had a better starting point, this quality of film that Revenge of the Sith was, that should have been the starting point. And then you go from there. It could have been way better. But also, while we're on the subject, the Revenge of the Sith game for consoles was actually a lot of fun. And a lot of people don't know, it actually has a fighting game mode in it. So you can fight Jedi versus Jedi and stuff. It's a lot of fun. If you haven't already played it, go check it out. It's actually, they just released it as a classic on the PSN if you're a PlayStation player. So, but Battlefront has long eluded, and I think part of the reason that people get so nostalgic for it is because it just hasn't been available in the current iteration. Like the only way you can play Battlefront now, as far as a quote unquote current generation of anything, is to play it on PC. That's it. And even then,
exactly,
you need special software to simulate a server, and even then, it doesn't always work properly. So
exactly. Ever since it was really big news when it was reported that EA was shutting down the Battlefront servers. Like, there was an uproar.
I did a fucking video about that last year or the year before, whenever it happened. And it was last year because I was in this room actually. And it was like a 17-minute video where I'm just staring at the camera and I'm talking about all the games that are getting shut down because of GameSpot and all that. Our game,
it's GameSpy.
GameSpy. It's GameSP something. Same spy. And I was really upset about it. And it was something. I still have a copy of the original for PS2. I have a copy of both games for Xbox. I still kept those, even though I don't have an Xbox anymore. And I have a copy of the second one for PC, which I play relatively often by myself because I don't feel like messing around with the servers. Usually, I have the software.
Honestly, that's one of the main reasons I play Battlefront. Yes, I know it's a big multiplayer game, but the bots are so good.
Yeah, it's really difficult, and I would while away hours online though. Like the console version of it, at least the Xbox version, was very well populated, played very well, and it was just the reason I think it works so well is so authentic, especially the second one. The second one just fired on all cylinders. You got to just about anything.
Second Battlefront,
Oh.
so damn good. So many maps, so many playable characters, so many modes. You got space battles, you got ground battles, you got those special modes where everybody played as a hero. That, like, Battlefront 2 it had so much bloody content.
And I think that's a huge reason, like, why people are up in arms about this new one. They're like, it doesn't have the same amount of content. Like, first of all, I'm just going to get this out on Front Street. If they took the Battlefield model and just threw a Star Wars skin and sounds on it, it would still be a really good game. I don't give a fuck who you are. That would be fine. There's nothing wrong with Battlefield when it works well. And just throwing Star Wars into
Battlefield Bad Company 2, still one
Right.
of the greatest shooters out there.
Exactly. So what you do is you take, these large maps and make them Star Wars, and you throw in the characters, you put the sound effects. It's a no-brainer. DICE didn't want to do that. They wanted to take a risk and build it from the ground up because they love the game.
And they want to do something different. I mean, people, like, I understand the complaints. I understand, like, people saying, well, they're just keep announcing that this game doesn't have this and doesn't have that. That's true, but at the same time, it goes to show you that they're really, really, really going away from Battlefield. And that was my big worry about this new Battlefront, that it was just going to be Battlefield Star Wars skin. Now, I wouldn't mind that. Wouldn't be a bad game, but that wouldn't be Battlefront still.
Right.
But it looks like they're trying to make this Battlefront. It's been confirmed. There's first person and first person and third person view. There's no iron sights, and there's going to be single player with bots.
Not to mention the fact that, and this is the big one for me, the first Battlefront versus the second Battlefront. Huge difference in content. The first Battlefront set out to do, okay, we want to see if this works. We want to make sure this gameplay style is as fun as it can be. It was, that was it. It was very simple.
And it became one of the best-selling Star Wars games of all time. Then Battlefront 2 came out, and that became the #1 best-selling Star Wars video game of all time.
Right. So the idea is like DICE has a very strict time schedule on this, and they're like, look, let's get the core gameplay down. Let's do it right. Let's do it really right. They always can expand on this. Once they get this first one done, whether there's going to be, the premium kind of version thing, which I'm okay with. Because DICE, if one thing they know how to do is support their games. You can say whatever you want to about their launches, but they work overtime to make it right if it fucks up. Because EA always...
Especially Battlefield 4. I was shocked to find out that literally over a year later, they were still fixing it and adding DLC.
Yeah, and they were supposed to... The content was supposed to end in July, but they're actually extending it to the end of the year as a way of saying thank you to the customer. And they're adding maps that they didn't advertise. So if you bought premium, you are now getting an additional DLC map pack for free that you were not told you would get. And that's all because of how DICE felt, which makes it clear that EA as a publisher was more to blame than DICE was as a developer.
Yeah, exactly. While I do admit, I say this all as much as I can, EA is still a better dev than Activision, in my opinion, with how they handle Call of Duty and World of Warcraft and Skylanders.
I agree with that.
But I'm not going to lie. EA does make some really stupid, boneheaded moves sometimes. I'm not going to deny that.
SimCity.
I still think they're not the... Yeah. I don't think they're the devil like everybody else does, but they really do make some bonehead decisions.
Wait a minute.
Learn
the
from them.
Dev-ill? The Dev-ill? I'm sorry. It's devil. Develop.
Oh, ha, ha.
Sorry, I couldn't let it drop, dude. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I hope people get my point. Like, EA, they're boneheaded sometimes, no doubt, but they're not the worst publisher out there, is what I'm saying. But I can understand the fear. Because for every good thing EA does, they do something bad next time, and people are wondering, is this going to be a good EA game, or is this going to be another SimCity Battlefield 4?
And you look at the care. I mean, you just look at any of the behind-the-scenes trailers that they've shown where the devs are talking, like when they're scanning in models and so.
And the environments, they went to the actual movie sets.
Well,
not movie sets,
right.
Movie locations.
Right, and when you go to that length, and granted, they're doing this on Disney's dime too, so
Yeah,
it's
they got a lot of money to spend.
right. So they're using their resources wisely, and I think that if they get this one right, and it's just a fairly, quote unquote, fairly basic game, and they get it right, then they've got the keys to the castle, if you will. They can go on and do whatever the hell they want, and they'll have the opportunity to do so. Which, and this is something a lot of people are going to look at me sideways for thinking. If Battlefront does as well as I think it's going to do, it's going to be awesome for Battlefield. Do you know why? DICE will have no choice but to focus their energies on the next iteration of Battlefront in a big bad way and get it done, which will inevitably force Battlefield to be on hold because they don't have the manpower to do it. So that means that the next Battlefield will also be made kind of over time. They have the opportunity because EA and DICE are making their bucks off Battlefront. So the next Battlefield will conceivably be that much better because they are afforded quite literally the time and money to do it right. DICE is an excellent developer. They're also working on Mirror's Edge 2. A lot of people forgot about that. So these guys are firing on all cylinders to be able to support their flagship title for as long as they have and go beyond what is expected of them to do that, to develop one of the most hotly anticipated games of the last decade. It really is. And then also to be doing a follow-up sequel to a game that, although critically acclaimed, didn't financially do all that great. It's a labor of love. These guys are the epitome of a developer that really understands and cares about the games that they're producing. And EA just has the muscle to be able to put them out and advertise. It is their game to lose. And I really don't think that they're going to fuck this one up. After what they dealt with a year and a half ago with Battlefield 4, there's no way. And at Hardline, say what you want about Hardline. It's a Battlefield 4 skin. Battlefield 4 skin, that's right. It's the end of a dick. However, it launched without incident, played perfectly fine, with a completely different developer under its belt, right? So
yeah, surprisingly, the guys who made Dead Space, that really surprised me.
That doesn't surprise me at all, in as much as it surprised me that they were the ones to develop it, but if you're going to try and do something different, get a different perspective on it. But I think it honestly speaks great volumes to the engine that Battlefield 4 had. And all the patches.
Yes, the Frostbite engine. I have to say, the Frostbite engine is a very impressive graphics engine.
And it again, one of these things that after, 3-4 months of patches to Battlefield 4, all that stuff made it into Hardline's beta, for crying out loud, which tells you how closely linked those two games really were, which is why I always maintained it really was just an upgrade, minor upgrade and minor engine change to Battlefield 4. And, when Battlefield 4 stops being supported and Battlefield Hardline gets a premium edition that I can get for under $40, I will buy it and I'll probably play it at that time. But the point here is that the infrastructure at DICE and EA and their affiliates is more than enough to get this franchise off the ground, make a game that functions well, is fun to play, and makes a lot of people's skepticism just go away by virtue of it just being great.
Those, I should say, are some really good points, Jim. And it's undeniable that DICE is a very experienced, well-deserving dev. They're a good developer. They're a good video game developer. They're also an honest one. They just so happen to be tied together with EA, who happens to be a bonehead at times. But we have to address some concerns that are actually kind of reasonable. There's no space battles, and there's no prequel era battles or factions. My favorite faction from the last two Battlefront games, the droids, the separatists, are not going to be in this new Battlefront. And there's going to be no space battles. One of the biggest innovations and attractions of Battlefront 2 is not going to be in this new Battlefront. Now, I have to play devil's advocate here because I understand the criticism here. You're taking away, well, not taking away, you're just not adding a bunch of content that were in games that are a decade old, and that is kind of something to be concerned about.
Although I understand and I do advocate that kind of concern, we're not talking about a facelift to fucking PlayStation 2 game. This is being built from the ground up, and it's meant to have more detail and more authenticity in a Star Wars game than has ever been there. That's the intent. And again, we're talking about a release window here that's very short relative to the ambition of which the game at face value is supposed to be. You can always add these features later. You can always do it in the sequel or DLC or whatever.
Yeah. I don't mind it being added later, but right there, what you just said, DLC.
Well, okay.
That's what people are really upset about. EA
And
making DICE take out this content and charge for it. Now, I'm not saying they're actually going to do that. I do think the whole dislocked content thing is a bit silly, but it is true sometimes.
Sometimes. I got to be honest with you here. I don't think that's the case with this. I think this is a simple matter of if there's add-on content to be had, it will be add-on. DICE has a history of developing add-on content after the fact. It's proven, tried, true. And look at what they did with Battlefield 4. There were so many new features being implemented into that game. No wonder it was fucking broken when it came out. They're trying to make it work. They're trying to make the launch work perfectly. And that's to be commended. And the people that are whining and crying about there not being certain features in a game that doesn't yet exist, they're building this out of nothing to expectations of a game they didn't develop. Okay? You have to be reasonable with this. And then if they're building this out of nowhere, they want the base game to work. They can always do things later. It's also, you know, in terms of just sheer disc size, is going to be 4 times as big, number one. So, you know, every little tree that you see has to be 10 times more graphically rendered. That was a standard def game. This is a high def game. And it has to be rendered in different ways. It's just a different way of doing things. On top of the fact that there was no way to do DLC when Battlefront 2 came out. It wasn't a thing. The first, quote, endgame content or DLC that came out that generation was the Halo map pack, which was also sold on disc. You didn't even download it. So you think about that. It's just a different time. So people just...
Different time, different style. We all get that, and I understand that. And while I agree with you, Jim, I really do agree with you, but I have to ask, if they're going to have, like... Okay, so you don't want to add the prequel-era battles and factions. That's disappointing, but if you're trying to tie this to the original trilogy and lead into the new Episode 7 movie, you know what? That's a clever idea. That's a good way to go. It's disappointing, but... Okay. But if it's been confirmed that there are air vehicles, there are TIE fighters and X-Wings, and there will be air battles, why can't there be space battles? I mean, making a space map shouldn't be that hard. It's literally just a giant skybox.
If I'm DICE, here's how I would approach this. Original trilogy, ground fighting plus dog fighting. In other words, what you already know for a fact you are very good at doing. A la Battlefield, okay? So I'm already doing this. Get all this done. I get a B team of developers on the case, my own developers, working on how we would do space battles and start working on the design of your prequel trilogy stuff. And then make that and see on a long enough timeline whether that becomes part of your premium content or if it becomes the next iteration of the game, which arguably could and maybe should be a year later, meaning you don't have to go ape with the first game. It just has to establish what it can do right. And let's say that they scrap the DLC model they've had for Battlefield in the past with Battlefront and do go for a more all-encompassing iteration. So Battlefront 1 comes out. Battlefront 2 did not come out that long after Battlefront 1. It was a year and a half maybe?
Yeah, only 1 year. Yeah, actually, It was almost exactly 1 year after the first Battlefront came out.
So my question would be, why can't they do that? So you've got the base game, it works perfectly fine. And then instead of it being a quote-unquote sequel, have it be a sequel-sized level add-on. Meaning, you know...
An expansion pack, basically.
Exactly. Why couldn't you do that? Why couldn't you expand it to have all these different factions? Why couldn't you just make it an ever-expanding thing? You know, because it isn't an MMO, but at the same time, you could have... You know, whether you were talking about PlanetSide or we're talking about or freaking Destiny or anything where there's lots of people online all the time, and even Battlefield. I mean, you could arguably patch a Battlefield game till the cows come home and sell DLC every 6 months, and people would be happy, as long as it was innovative and interesting and so forth. But because for some reason, there's this idea that you have to put out new titles to make money, which I think we're getting away from. I do think that there's a push for devs and especially publishers to make financially viable franchises that are platforms you can build on, rather than scrapping it and starting over every time. I think the age of the sequel is nearly dead, which I'm happy for.
Ooh, that's a pretty big statement there.
I honestly think that in a world, I always say that you've got the x86 architecture across all the major vehicles for game, PC, Xbox, PlayStation. Okay, you can have the base game, have your base engine going, and you could conceivably tack on character models, maps, features, as long as that platform is in existence, arguably close to 10 years in any given space. So maybe, and this is a huge maybe Battlefront, because it would be a smart risk to take, maybe Battlefront would be EA's attempt to try this to see if it works, because how awesome would it be if they come out and say, we're not going to be doing sequels, we're going to constantly expand this game. We're not going to gouge you. The prices are going to be reasonable, and it won't come out more than twice a year or something like that, and they'll be big. There'll be lots of content, new game styles, all this stuff, and you will have a dedicated community to this and all these things. Would that or would that not be more preferable than game, 2 DLC packs, next sequel, 2 DLC packs? Like, if we want to have our cake and eat it too, what's really the ideal situation here, given the fact that we have to start from somewhere? You know what I mean? This isn't a huge opportunity for EA to kind of flip things up a bit.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I know the kind of game you're talking about. And you know what? I would actually like that. It's what I want Respawn and EA to do with Titanfall, but they didn't. They did their DLC, and now they're going to do a sequel, which is unfortunate. I was hoping they just build and build on top of that game. Kind of similar to what other developers are doing, such as Valve and Overkill, what they're doing with Team Fortress 2 and Payday 2. They're not going to release a sequel for those games. They're just going to keep adding and adding and adding content to those games. Like, how old is Team Fortress 2 and it's still getting new content? I know for a fact Payday 2 is over 2 years old. That game's over 2 years old, and it's still getting new content and DLC. So, you know what? I get what you're saying, Jim, and I would love it. I would actually love that if that was the new norm, where someone made a game and instead of years later we get another sequel, which is basically the other game with more features that the other game could have gotten. I would really like to see what you're talking about, where it's a game and that game just keeps growing and growing and growing, like with Warframe and Destiny and Payday 2 and Team Fortress 2. I would love that to be the new norm. But this is EA we are dealing with here, and EA isn't all too, I wouldn't say fond of that concept, they just haven't embraced that concept yet. They're still into the whole title, DLC, new title, more DLC. And that's what people,
and that's fair.
It's fair. It's not.
That's
it's not
fair. I'm just saying that's a fair assumption for you to make, and I think you're probably right. It probably is where things are going to go. The reason I make the point is very simple.
That's the age we live in, and it's possible.
Not only that, but also that we don't know what the plan is here. Most of the backlash is coming from assumptions based on what little information we have. We don't know enough about the game, the gameplay, or the long-term plan to make educated decisions on whether or not this is going to be any good. This falls into that same old trap of people have made a decision about a game they haven't even seen, let alone played yet. And I would rather talk about the potential of it and give them benefit of the doubt, because they don't have any of my money right now.
Hey, true.
They don't have any of my money.
Exactly.
So the onus is on them to make me want to pay them money. My favorite franchises are all getting expanded in the next 18 months. I've only got so much money. So who's going to get my money first? It's up for grabs. We've got Arkham Knight. We've got Deus Ex is coming. Oh my god!
Oh my god, that trailer.
Yeah, and then you got Destiny as huge content coming out, which, as we all know, that's all I do with my time. So why I'd ever buy another game, I don't know, but I will. And then Battlefront, of course, and many other games that off the top of my head I can't remember. So EA and DICE know they're in a competitive landscape in a very difficult year to sell games, and I honestly believe that DICE is bringing their A game. I think EA is just going to have to do what they can to support them, and so far that appears to be the case. And until I see absolute unrefutable proof of something different, I have no reason to speculate in the negative.
I am so glad you are you're almost not entirely optimistic, but you're very optimistic about this new Battlefront game, and I'm happy for you, Jim. I really am. While I'm not in the absolute haters category, I'm really not. I can't help but be concerned for this game. I was going to pre-order it. When I first saw that trailer, I was like, I got to pre-order this game. New Battlefront, hooray! Hero characters, first and third person view, yay! But the more details I hear, I understand what you're talking about. They're building this game from scratch, and it is quite the undertaking. But I still can't help but just raise an eyebrow at the lack of some things that were in 10-year-old games. But I understand where you're coming from. Like, if they do eventually become DLC, sure, there'll be an uproar, but hey, the content will be there and available to play, which will be awesome. It's a really fine line between... It's a fine line between greed and reasonable pricing, and
Sure.
It's a difficult landscape, like, as you said, it's a difficult landscape for pricing games, buying games. I'm not going to pre-order Battlefront, but I am definitely going to I'm going to look at this game. I'm not going to lose sight of it. It's important to me. The Battlefront series is important. It's important to you. We loved the original Battlefront. All we can do, really, is hope and keep our eyes open to how this new Battlefront turns out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that's been a video. This has been a very awesome conversation. Nearly hit the 30-minute mark here. Oh, boy. So, that's our opinions, that's our thoughts on the old Star Wars Battlefronts, the new Star Wars Battlefront, and a little other stuff in between. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please hit the like button if you did. Leave a comment. What are your thoughts? I know you guys will have some thoughts and feelings on this one. Do you think DICE is going to hit it out of the ballpark? Do you think EA is going to screw it all up? What do you guys think? And, Jim, if more people want to hear and see from you, where do they have to go?
Well, they need to go to grindheadjim.com or youtube.grindheadjim.com or twitch.grindheadjim.com. And if you stay with us this long, I want you to put in the comment section, #KillAllEwoks.
Yes. Yes. So that's been a video. Thank you once again for joining me, Jim. And as always, guys, I'll see you later. And may the Force be with you and your wallet.